It began, as most things do, in a moment so unassuming it could have slipped by unnoticed. A drizzle coated the cobblestones of Old Town that Wednesday afternoon, the kind of rain that didn't pour so much as whisper, and Julian, 23, fingers ink-stained from sketching strangers on subway rides, ducked beneath the green awning of the second-hand bookstore more for shelter than for stories. That's when he saw her. Not noticed, saw. She was thumbing through a copy of The Master and Margarita, her profile a study in gentle ruin. Crow's feet etched around her eyes like she'd smiled too much in her youth and hadn't done so for years since. A loose lock of hair, graying but proud, swept across her cheek. She was beautiful, yes, but not in that airbrushed, sharp-boned way his generation praised online. She was beautiful like an old vinyl record, soft, crackling, and real, alive with imperfections that told you she'd lived more than a little. He stared longer than he meant to, not because he thought she'd look back, but because she looked like someone who hadn't been looked at in far too long. Julian didn't mean to speak. But she muttered something under her breath, half amusement, half disbelief, as she turned a page, and before he could think better of it, he said, "That book either ruins you or saves you. Depends on how bad your year's been." She blinked, slowly, like his voice had pulled her out of some underwater thought, and looked at him, not through him, not past him, at him. "And which was it for you?" she asked. Her voice was lower than he expected, like the bow of a cello, velvet and grounded. "It ruined me," he said, grinning. "Which saved me, I guess." That was how it began, not in passion, not in heat, but in rain and sarcasm and shared weight. Her name was Caroline. 44. Divorced 5 years. She taught comparative literature at a nearby college but seemed disillusioned with academia, like someone who knew too well how to unweave the beauty of things. She smelled faintly of coffee and eucalyptus. Julian thought of her as someone who had stopped trying to impress and started trying to survive. And that made her real in a way none of his recent flings had ever been. Their next meeting was coincidence, or fate, depending on how sentimental you are. The same bookstore, 3 days later. She said nothing about it. Neither did he. They spoke again, this time about the morality of Anna Karenina and the problem with digital memories. She laughed, eventually, not a forced one, not that polite chuckle women wear like armor. This was different. It slipped out when he impersonated a Nabokov-obsessed professor he'd once had, and when she laughed, it cracked something open in him. And, if only for a moment, something in her, too. She pressed her fingers to her mouth like it had surprised her, the sound, the feeling. "I haven't laughed like that in a long time," she murmured. "Maybe ever." Julian didn't touch her, not then, not even close. But he carried the image of her laugh in his back pocket like a lucky coin. It was a week before she asked him a question he didn't expect. They were sitting on a bench outside the bookstore again, coffee in hand, rain threatening again but not quite there. "How old are you, really?" she asked. He paused. "Old enough to know I like talking to you," he said. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl either. 23, he admitted. "Jesus," she said, but not unkindly. "You're barely older than my daughter." He winced. "Does that mean I have to stop saying clever things now?" Her lips quirked. "No," she said. "But it means I probably should stop listening." But she didn't. And he didn't stop speaking. If anything, they began speaking more, texts at first, long and rambling, then coffee becoming habit, then walks that stretched from dusk to almost night. She let him see the layers beneath her cool distance, a failed marriage that had hollowed out her sense of romance, a daughter who barely spoke to her, a department chair who kept recommending lighter reading lists to match the emotional range of today's students. She shared these things not to gain sympathy, but because she saw in Julian a strange softness, unguarded and unformed. He didn't judge. He didn't fix. He just listened. And that, more than anything, unmoored her. The climax came, as most do, not in grandeur but in something small, easily missed. It was a cold night. He had walked her to her car, something he always insisted on, though she mocked him for it, and she was fumbling with her keys when he reached out and gently tucked a falling strand of hair behind her ear. That was it. Just that. But her breath hitched, visibly. "Don't," she said, but without strength. "Why?" he asked. Because you'll make me want things I've trained myself not to want. His fingers didn't leave her cheek. Maybe you should untrain yourself. That did it. That bold, reckless, naive pulled a real smile from her. Not a polite one. Not a conditioned one. A genuine, gut-deep smile that made her look younger and older at the same time. That was the first night she didn't tell him goodbye. The weeks that followed didn't so much fly as fold inward, intimate and urgent. They carved out a quiet world for themselves in the hours no one else seemed to want: early mornings at the park before the dog walkers claimed it, dusky bookstores just before closing, occasional weekends in cafes too far from campus for anyone to notice. Julian grew bold with time, but not pushy. He never asked her to explain herself, but Caroline, perhaps disarmed by his lack of pressure, started offering pieces of her past like puzzle fragments, as if daring him to build a picture he might still want to look at. She had married young, 23, ironically. A fellow professor. Charismatic, brilliant, venomous. The kind of man who called his wife a muse in public and then corrected her grammar at dinner parties. Their marriage had withered in the way many do, a slow rot behind a manicured facade. He left her at 40 with a fresh PhD student and a smirk that implied it had been inevitable. The divorce had been clean, financially speaking. Emotionally, it stripped her bare. Her daughter, 19 at the time, had taken his side. Caroline never recovered from that betrayal. "I gave her everything," she told Julian once, her voice soft and cold like fresh snow. But in the end, all she saw was his version of the story. Julian listened, always. Not with pity, but with a kind of quiet fury, as if someone had wronged his own skin. Yet he had wounds, too, subtler and more self-inflicted. A mother who drowned her grief in pills after his father left. A string of relationships that felt more like therapy sessions. An art degree half-finished and barely hanging on. His drawings, fluid, surreal, haunting, were the only thing that felt true. "You draw like someone who wants to remember everything and forget it all at once," she said once, running a finger along the edge of a sketch he'd made of her, faceless, posed in a bookstore aisle. But outside their cocoon, the world sharpened. Whispers started on campus. Julian had been careless one afternoon. A student saw them talking in her office, a little too close, a little too lone. He wasn't even enrolled in her classes, but it didn't matter. He was young, she was faculty, and people would rather believe in scandal than coincidence. "Is it true?" his roommate asked him one night, trying to sound casual, eyes flicking up from his phone. "You and Dr. Raines?" Julian had only smirked, played it off. "Wishful thinking," he said. But rumors have a way of growing teeth. Caroline was more careful than him, but not invincible. A neighbor of hers, an uptight divorcee with a dog and an inflated sense of moral authority, saw Julian leaving her house one Saturday morning, hoodie pulled low, still smelling of sleep and wine and skin. She didn't say anything directly, of course. But by the following Monday, Caroline noticed a shift: cold shoulders from colleagues, passive-aggressive comments about ethical standards in meetings, a sudden request from the dean for her to attend a routine departmental review. The climax came in the form of a letter. Not an email. A real, typewritten letter slid under Caroline's office door in a plain envelope. No signature. Just a single line. "He's not just young, he's your student." It wasn't true. Not technically. But the implication was enough to burn down careers. She read it alone, eyes flicking over the words once, then again, hands steady even as her breath stuttered. Then she called him. No preamble, no greeting. "We're not safe anymore," she said. Julian was silent for a long moment. "Do you want to be?" he asked finally. She hesitated. That hesitation, more than the letter, scared him. "I don't know," she whispered. "I stopped thinking I deserved that years ago." The next day, she didn't come to campus. She didn't answer his texts for 3 days. Julian tried to respect it. He told himself it was smart, a cooling period, a pause to breathe before things went too far off the rails. But by the second night, he was sitting on his bedroom floor with old charcoal drawings spread around him like fallen leaves, hands black with smudge, heart cracked and restless. On the third night, he showed up at her house uninvited. Caroline opened the door wearing a threadbare university sweatshirt and no makeup, and for a moment she just looked at him like he was a mistake she hadn't decided to make yet. But then she stepped aside, let him in, poured 2 glasses of red wine like it was a ritual, like it had been waiting for him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "But I'm glad you are." That night, they didn't undress each other. They sat in the living room until past 3 a.m., the wine untouched on the table, speaking like fugitives in a language only they understood. She talked about the first time she realized her husband no longer loved her, how it wasn't even a fight, just the sound of silence that followed a bad joke. He talked about his mother slipping into addiction so gently he didn't notice until the refrigerator was empty and her teeth were rotting. They spoke not to explain, but to be known. "I'm not trying to be your redemption," Julian said softly. "I just want to be the reason you look forward to waking up." She didn't reply with words. Instead, she reached across the couch and took his hand, holding it like something fragile. "I thought I was done with firsts," she whispered. "But you make everything feel like a beginning again." They started meeting at night more often. Not out of shame, but for the safety of the dark. They'd drive out of town, to the edge of nowhere, where the stars still showed their faces. They sat on the hood of her car, passing a thermos of coffee back and forth, talking about everything and nothing. Julian sketched her sometimes by moonlight, her silhouette against the stars, the curve of her neck, the quiet tragedy of someone learning how to want again. She didn't ask to see those drawings. She just let him make them, a silent trust that he wouldn't ruin what they had by showing her the truth of herself. One night, they sat beneath a sky thick with clouds, the stars veiled, the air electric like a storm was waiting. "Do you think it's love?" he asked. Not teasing. Not dramatic. Just a quiet truth offered up like a secret. She exhaled, long and slow, the kind of sigh you let out when you've been holding your breath for years. "I think it's something that doesn't ask to be named," she said. "Because the moment we name it, we'll start trying to fit it into someone else's box. But love doesn't stay hidden, no matter how careful you are." It happened on a Thursday. They had gone to a tiny jazz bar 2 towns over, one of those hole-in-the-wall places where no one asked questions and the music was always just a little too loud. They left late, walking hand in hand through the parking lot, careless with the illusion of safety. She kissed him there, under a flickering street lamp, and for the first time, she didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. Someone was. Neither of them saw the figure across the lot, half-shielded by shadows, phone out, raised. The next morning, she received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo, grainy, zoomed, unmistakable. Him. Her. Lips touching, faces tender. No caption. Just the image. She didn't reply. She didn't forward it. She just stared at it until the screen dimmed. That night, she didn't invite Julian over. She didn't reply to his messages. She was terrified, and not of scandal, not of professional ruin. She was terrified because for the first time in over a decade, she had let someone in completely. And now the world was coming to collect its toll. The photo didn't spread. Not yet. But the air had shifted. She could feel it in the way her colleagues watched her in meetings, in how her department chair's words were suddenly wrapped in politeness so brittle it could snap at any moment. Julian found out about the photo 2 days later. Not from her, but from a friend, a barista who had been in that same parking lot, who recognized him and warned him. "Someone's talking," the guy said, nervous. "I don't know if it's viral or anything, but people know." Julian didn't tell Caroline he knew. Not right away. He waited. Until one night, after hours of silence, he showed up again, this time without knocking. "I know someone saw us," he said. "And I don't care." Caroline stood in the doorway, robe knotted tightly, face unreadable. "You don't have to live the fallout of this." "I do." "I want to," he said, stepping closer. "Whatever this is, messy, confusing, completely insane, I want it. I want you." Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I can survive being wanted." Julian reached for her. Not to fix. Not to save. Just to remind her she wasn't alone. In that moment, the storm finally broke. The silence between them didn't last, but it changed. It grew heavier, more deliberate, like a language built of glances and what they didn't dare say aloud. Caroline returned to campus, posture sharpened, tone clipped. She didn't look at him in the halls. She didn't answer his calls during the day. But at night, when the world relaxed its grip, her voice would soften again, phone calls that started in tension and unraveled into longing, messages that bled through midnight and into dawn. Julian began drawing obsessively. He filled page after page with versions of her face, but never from photographs, only memory. He drew the way she looked when she first told him about her daughter. The way her fingers twitched when she was resisting the urge to touch him in public. The way her smile, when it came, seemed to break some sacred rule. He didn't show anyone. He didn't want to share her with the world, not when the world would only look at her and see scandal. But secrets demand energy. The more they loved in hiding, the more it began to burn them from the inside out. Then came the conference. A regional literature event, 3 days of lectures, readings, and faux intellectual mingling. Caroline was presenting on feminist reinterpretations of tragic heroines. Julian was attending with a small group from the student paper, covering the event for the campus newsletter. It should have been nothing. It should have been a passing overlap. Instead, it became the stage. She didn't know he was attending until she saw him across the hotel lobby, badge around his neck, eyes wide, trying to play it cool. She nearly turned on her heel, but their eyes met for just a second too long. He was supposed to be covering the keynote panel. Instead, he slipped into the back of her breakout session, sitting in the corner, notebook unopened. She spoke with her usual clarity and precision, dissecting the ways in which society punished women for feeling too much or not enough, for aging, for leaving, for staying. She quoted H.D. and Sylvia Plath and even Anna Karenina. Respect was invented to cover the empty place where love should be, she said, and something inside Julian buckled. Then, during the Q&A, a hand shot up in the front row. The woman didn't identify herself. She didn't ask a question. She asked a statement. Do you think it's ethical for someone in your position, respected, published, admired, to engage in a romantic relationship with a student, even if they're technically not enrolled in your course? The room stilled. No whispers. Just eyes. Caroline paused, very slightly. Just long enough for it to sting. I think, she said finally, that ethical dilemmas only become interesting when they involve human beings, not hypotheticals. And if the relationship is real, the woman pressed. Would you admit it? Caroline looked down, then up again. Straight at Julian. And she said, clearly, yes. It's real. The air in the room twisted. Some people shifted, others sat straighter. A few gasped, not dramatically, but in that tight, scandalized way intellectuals reserve for drama within their own ranks. Julian didn't move. He didn't leave. But the second Caroline exited the stage, the whispers began. By nightfall, she was trending on campus forums. The faculty board called an emergency meeting for the following week. An anonymous complaint had already been filed. The university launched a preliminary review of conduct. Caroline locked herself in her hotel room, curtains drawn, wine uncorked. Julian found her 3 hours later, slouched in an armchair, shoes off, glass half empty. I shouldn't have said it, she muttered, voice gravel. Yes, you should have, he said, kneeling in front of her. You finally said something for you. She cupped his face. I don't know if I've ever done that. He looked at her, really looked, and said, then let this be the first time. But her hands were trembling. She was unraveling, and it wasn't because she didn't love him. It was because, maybe, she did. The fallout came quickly, as it always does in places built on prestige and polite hypocrisy. A faculty ethics board review. A series of meetings filled with cold coffee, faux-concerned expressions, and passive-aggressive phrasing like breach of professional boundaries and conflict of power dynamics. She wasn't fired yet but was placed on administrative leave, pending further evaluation. The official language was sterile, bloodless. The real message was clear: disappear, or be dismantled. Julian wasn't summoned, because they had no authority over him. But that didn't protect him from the stares. Campus had changed. People didn't whisper so much as look through him, like he was a warning sign in human form. His friends grew distant. A few asked him outright if it was true. He didn't deny it. He didn't lie. But he also didn't elaborate. He didn't owe them that. It was Caroline who pulled away first. Not cruelly. Not suddenly. But with that quiet ache of someone who knows she's standing at the edge of something she can't survive falling from. They met one last time at the greenhouse outside town, the one with the overgrown succulents and cracked tile floor, where she used to take her daughter as a child. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on a rusted bench in the middle of the humid air, staring at a cactus blooming in mid-July, something that shouldn't be happening, something miraculous and doomed all at once. "I thought you hated dramatic exits," Julian said, approaching slowly. "I do," she replied, not looking at him. "But I've realized I'm not the main character. I'm the cautionary tale." He sat beside her, leaving only inches between them. "That's bullshit," he said. "You're just someone who finally wanted something for herself." She smiled, faintly. "And look what it cost." He reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper and string. "This is for you." She unwrapped it slowly, carefully, like it might be fragile. It was a drawing, one of the ones he hadn't shown her before. It wasn't stylized. It wasn't romantic. It was her, eyes tired but steady, the corners of her mouth lifted just barely, like the start of a smile that might not make it all the way. It was the truth of her, captured not with judgment, but with reverence. She traced the lines with her fingertips. "You saw me," she whispered. "Still do," he said. "I can't keep doing this to you," she said, turning toward him now, her voice barely holding together. "I can't be the reason your life gets smaller." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've made my world bigger than it's ever been." They didn't say "I love you." It would have broken the spell. What they had was not the type of love that relied on language, it was the kind that lived in shared silence, in unsent texts, in the way she memorized the shape of his hands and he learned to read her eyes like scripture. She stood. So did he. "I'm going away for a while," she said. "A sabbatical. Officially. But really. I need to figure out who I am without all this noise." "Will I see you again?" Caroline looked at him for a long time. "Then, do you want to?" Julian didn't answer. He watched her leave. She didn't turn around. He didn't call after her. That was their pact, unspoken. No begging. No scenes. Just the space between years, holding the weight of what they had been. A month later, she was gone from campus. Her office cleaned out. Her name quietly removed from the faculty directory. Julian stayed. He graduated, eventually. Published a small zine of his sketches. The final page held no title, no caption, just the drawing of her, staring somewhere just off the page, eyes wide open, like she saw something the rest of the world had missed. Sometimes, people still asked him what happened with Dr. Raines. He'd always shrug. Smile a little. "We were real," he'd say. And they were. But the story never said if real was enough.